is another edition of Fantasy Football Picks and Bets on Mayo Media Network, presented by Prize Picks. Hit the description, sign up for Prize Picks, use code MMN for Mayo Media Network, and get yourself a match deposit up to $100, the best season-long over-under fantasy props. Right now, you can go check out some of the softest of all of the lines, too, if you have a good lean either way. Today, we're breaking down the Dallas Cowboys individual player projections and talking about season-long fantasy football running back handcuffs and the best strategy to go along with that. We're using the player projections from runthesims.com. If you get in on runthesims.com right now, before August 1st, you get the founding membership rate for life. Your price never going to go up. And if you go to runthesims.com/mayo, then you'll get an even bigger discount off of that. If you like your own inputs, you don't want someone else telling you what to do, but the easiest way to run simulations, an optimizer, player projections, runthesims.com is where you want to be right now. Remember to smash the like button for the video and give me your favorite over-under for a Dallas Cowboys player on Prize Picks right now. What do you think the best over or the best under is? Which Cowboys player would you be looking at? Jake Ciely from theathletic.com is on the line, who has a brand new show on the Bets TV YouTube channel. Congratulations, Jake.
Congratulations. Thank you. I do appreciate that. Yeah, all in football. Yeah, it's going to be Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. It's going to be Chris Meany on Mondays, Stephanie Smalls on Tuesdays, and Jeff Ratcliffe on Wednesdays. It's going to be a lot of fun. With this Wednesday, or depending on when you saw this, might be too late, but it's the launch show. Going to have all three of them together. I appreciate it, Pat. I'm excited to have my own video show.
Of course. It's been a long time coming. It's been like, we've been doing the show. We've been doing the Pat Mayo Experience, at least, where we just did the running back rankings for the season. If you just want to stick on Mayo Media Network and go check that out. Plus, I should let you know, rate, review, and subscribe to this show on Apple Podcasts. 5-star rating, something you enjoy about the show, Twitter handle or email. And you, folks, are in a draw for cash giveaways. It's at $500 right now is the pool, but a few more reviews, just a few more reviews, and I'm upping that pool to $1,000. We get a boatload of more reviews, even more money for me to give away to you. So please go do that right now and subscribe and join prizepicks.com. Use the link in the description, or just go to prizepicks.com and use code MMN and get yourself a $100 deposit match. I highly recommend that you go do this, okay?
The rapper?
The rapper, exactly. Let's talk Dallas Cowboys. Well, yeah,
is he still around?
He's like 50. Anyway, let's talk about Dallas Cowboys players because, I mean, A, it's a popular team and a very popular fantasy team this year. As it pertains to your season-long strategy, even in redraft leagues, not best ball, because we've been talking about best ball a little bit. I don't love best ball. I like head-to-head leagues. That's just what I think that most people play. And I think that best ball has been gotten a little bit overblown because people don't have any content to do in the industry in May, in June, even in parts of July. So they're just really glomming on to best ball. So I know a lot of new people are getting into it because the draft is the most fun thing you can do. But let's be real here. More people play your head-to-head season-long leagues than anything else, don't they?
Oh yeah, it's still not even close. This is like super flex. As much as we want to get super flexes being more common, just because quarterbacks are so easy to find and the position's been devalued, even to the point of it was devalued of how the NFL is today, let alone the fact of like everything involved. Yeah, we're just trying to get more people involved in these things, but they're still not the majority. They're still even probably not. There's probably, I would argue, more people still playing non-PPR, even two wide receivers of like old traditional, and I put that in quotes, versus people that are playing best ball and superflex and stuff like that. It's fun, but it's not. It feels like, we'll put it this way too, Pat, is it feels like the people who do play, it's because they play in like 20 best ball leagues because they can be drafted and done. It's not like there's 20 people playing one league.
Yes, I think that's a really good point. But the reason I bring this up, because one of the biggest strategies in best ball is stacking your team, because you want to maximize those big weeks. And the Cowboys, along with the Chiefs, are one of the most popular teams to do this with. Do you think that is a viable strategy in season-long head-to-head leagues? Like if you drafted Dak, you drafted Lamb, and you drafted Cooper, and maybe even grab Gallup towards the end, either Blake Jarwin or Dalton Schultz, whichever one you prefer of those two. Like, do you think that's a viable strategy in your head-to-head season-long league?
Hold on, I was bringing Backley Bark over here. So if you switch to me, that's why I was off screen. No, in seasonal, no. I don't sway away from it. It's the same as when I talk about two wide receivers from the same team. You know, Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb, if Amari Cooper is healthy, can be very viable for any team. We've seen the Packers do it for years. We've seen just last year the Vikings. You can have two number one wide receivers from the same team. Where it's a little different in seasonal is that it's because it's head to head and it's not best ball, and it's not best ball replaces a player if you have a down game. And seasonal, you can't. So if you have Dak and Cooper and it's a run heavy game, or it's a game they just get blown out and nothing goes right, you're not just hit at one position, you're hit at two. The argument for the upside of it is, well, when they go off, they're going to blow up and you're going to dominate at two positions. And most weeks, you're not going to have the down games. It's just, that's why I don't have a problem doing it, but I don't actively try to do it. It would have to be the best value. So for the Cowboys, it might be right now, I take CeeDee Lamb in the third, and because of Amari Cooper's injury, he falls to the fourth, fifth round. And at that point, Amari Cooper is clearly the best wide receiver on the board. Or with the Buccaneers, I take Godwin and Mike Evans is still sitting there in the fifth round. Then I do it because it's the best player on the board. So that I won't stay away from it, but I don't actively try to do it.
Let's talk about the Prize Picks season-long yardages for those wide receivers. You mentioned this Amari Cooper injury, and it looks like he will not start practicing for the Cowboys until after week 2 of the preseason, which still puts him on track to play in week 1, presuming everything goes right for him. And on Prize Picks, his receiving total right now is 1,175.5 receiving yards. CeeDee Lamb, meanwhile, is behind him at 1,050.5 receiving yards. Now, in season-long drafts, Lamb is going ahead of Cooper. Is this just a very clear situation to play the under on Cooper and the over on Lamb?
I think it is. You know, I can push back and immediately say, well, Cooper's only hit that number once, but also we have an extra game. But the one thing is, when it's aggressive over-unders, and this one's a little, I wouldn't say it's super aggressive, but it's a little bit aggressive, you're going to find that I preach this. I will push to the under more often than not because it's the NFL. You bake in one missed game for Cooper, maybe two, even before we even talk his injury that he's dealing with right now. Just in general with anybody, especially running backs, but all positions. Maybe not quarterback because it's very likely a lot of quarterbacks end up playing the full season and, you know, they don't come out for plays. Like Julio Jones being dinged up. He still plays, but he's not playing 100% of the game because he's not 100% this week. Running backs and wide receivers, I'm going to push towards the under often when we're talking about the high-end aggressive ones. And this one feels aggressive because it's a number he's only hit once in 16 games. You get the extra game, but even so, okay, he averages 80, 90 yards. He's barely getting over the over. So I would take the under for Cooper, and yes, I would hit the over on Lamb because I have Lamb myself hitting the over on that number. And there's a scenario, as you mentioned in drafts, where Lamb becomes the number one, similar to Calvin Ridley taking over as the number one for the Falcons last year.
So let's jump over to runthesims.com for a second and play around with these projections to see what we can get right now. So right now, I have Cooper projected at 21% market share, CeeDee Lamb at 20%, Michael Gallup at 15%. Then you have Cedric Wilson at 5%, Sammy Fehoko. How do I pronounce that?
Fehoko.
Yeah.
Fehoko.
I have him at 4%, Noah Brown at 1%, Malik Turner at 1%.
Pretend he's French.
Oh, I mean, that's probably a pretty good idea. And Zeke around 12% with Tony Pollard at 6%, soaking some of that up. So do you think that 21 and 20 is a good number for Cooper and a good number for Lamb?
I think a solid number. I actually have 19.8 and 19.3. So I have 20 and 19. I'm 1 percentage point off from you are in those. So I think those are pretty good numbers.
All right. So let's jump over to see what that actually gives us in terms of receiving numbers over 17 games. As you can see, there's no one here above Terry McLaurin. That would be at 1248. When do we get to a Dallas receiver? Okay. We have Amari Cooper with a 21% market share at 1,114.5 yards. You can round up and call that an even 1,115. So when we go to Prize Picks and we see 1175, like he would definitely have to overachieve this season in order to get to that number. And we think about CeeDee Lamb in that same context. As we keep going down and try to find CeeDee Lamb, his at 20% market share in a pass-heavy offense with Dak presuming to be back fully healthy, them throwing as much as possible. You have 1045, which is right around his 1050. So even that, if he misses a game, might be a little too high. But I think I would much...
Well, what do you have Dak throwing for?
I have Dak throwing for. Let's just go...
That's interesting because that's going to sway the entire team, obviously.
Oh, of course. So I don't want to look at rushing. I want to look at yardage. Yardage for Dak Prescott, I have at 4,702 yards.
Okay, well, there's the difference between ours, and I was wondering why, because I have a little bit, as I mentioned, I have 1% lower on both. My numbers are slightly ahead of yours in receiving, but that's because I have Dak throwing for 4,900 yards. If that's aggressive, which it is, it is aggressive for Dak Prescott, and that's not even the 400 yards a game he was averaging aggressive. But if he's more towards your number, and then you even tick off 1% for both down to my projections, now they're both way under now. Not way under, but percentage-wise.
So, and that really depends on how you feel about Michael Gallup as well. So if Gallup is a bigger part of this offense, then maybe that a lot of people are giving him credit for. And then like ADP right now, Gallup has been one of the biggest risers since the beginning of the season in high-stakes leagues, in regular head-to-head drafts, hell, even in best ball. We're seeing him go up because everyone wants a part of this Dallas offense. So I think this really comes down to, if we jump back over to the projections, is I have them running almost 1,100 plays, but it's the rush rate that I think that is the big difference between you and I. I had them at a 44% rushing rate. Now I can amend. So what do you have them at?
42.3.
42.3. So let's just call it 42% for the Dallas rush rate, and I'll save that and see what that does to Dak Prescott's overall numbers. And this is how you can utilize that's what I say as a part of Run the Sims, like what is going on here. Now, all of a sudden, Dak is up to 4,870 in terms of yardage.
Which is pretty close.
Which is pretty close. And now if we just go to Cooper, that's Cooper Kupp. Now we go to Amari Cooper. He's up to 1,154 in terms of yardage, and CeeDee Lamb is over his Prize Picks over-under projection. He's at 1,082, which is higher than his 1,050, and Cooper's a lot closer. But that's presuming 17 games, a lower rush rate than I was actually expecting to begin with, because some of that rushing rate is Dak Prescott baked into it as well, that he's going to take off X amount of times. And he's not Lamar, he's not Kyler Murray, but he still runs more than Matt Ryan or Tom Brady, so that will affect the rushing rate just a little bit. Do you think that the defense is any better this year?
No. It's funny. I have one of my closest friends is a Cowboys fan. It's like, oh yeah, we got the pieces. We could. There's so many ifs. Granted, if you looked at it on paper, you're like, oh, remember Keanu Neal when he was great? Remember, oh crap, I just forgot the other one. I was just about to say his name. Anyway, if you look at their secondary, it's like, if healthy, and if he was this when healthy, and if this guy is this, and if this one is this, and if this one replaces Van Reich and all this type of stuff. There's so many ifs. If you told me they got to middle of the pack this year and they were just a middle of the road defense, I'd say conceivable. I still think it's a bottom 10 defense, which is why I have the offense passing more than you do and why I could definitely see that. But to also go back to even when we were talking about the share, is what if you bring up Michael Gallup? What if this is the Panthers? And people might say, well, the Panthers, they all finished very close. But there was one clear leader. This Robbie Anderson clearly led it, but DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel were super close. So what if it's Cooper clearly in the lead and CeeDee Lamb are even? Or CeeDee Lamb clearly in the lead and Cooper falls back and Gallup and Cooper are even? I say that to say is those top two are probably better under bets, and Gallup might be the better over. Do we have an over bet on Michael Gallup?
There is no number posted on Prize Picks for Michael Gallup receiving yards this year, but I can tell you, just by the projections that we just did, and I'll put in Michael Gallup, we have Michael Gallup at 54 receptions on 94 targets. It's a very low catch rate for him, but with an elevated ADOT programmed into the system, that would still put him over 800 yards and 5 touchdowns for the year. And I bet
numbers are pretty similar.
I bet that the over-under would not be 800. I bet you it would be like 715 or something like that. So I think the way that I would play it, once I see what the Gallup number is under Cooper, under Lamb, over Gallup would be my sort of lean on the situation.
Yeah. I think that's a good way of looking at it too. So yeah, my initial reaction to start this off was under Cooper over Lamb, but I might lean under unless, but the thing is the numbers will probably change if this happens. I was gonna say if Cooper is still, not playing in week 2 of the preseason, week 3 of the preseason, then, okay, now obviously he was the under the entire time, but now maybe Lamb is ready to take that Ridley-like step forward. But again, those numbers would probably move. They'll probably move the lines by that point. If that happens, they'd be smart to.
All right, well, let's take a look at Ezekiel Elliott because Tony Pollard doesn't have an over-under on his rushing prop right now, but the fantasy prop on prizepicks.com for Ezekiel Elliott is 1,100 on the dot, 0.5. Yeah. That seems like a
smash the over.
Oh, really? I was going to say that seems like a really fair number to me.
I have him for over 1,200 yards. Smash. Smash, smash, smash.
The issue, like I think I have him over. Let's see here. Let's go to the builder. Ezekiel Elliott, 1,240 yards. That's even with the reduced rushing rate. And if we go look at the inputs by the team, I have him at a 60% market share of the rushes with Pollard at 20 and Dak at 16. That might even be high on Dak at the moment. We discussed on the running back ranking show on the Pat Mayo Experience, I have Zeke as my number 4 overall player, my number 4 overall running back. I think that he's going to have a great year. The issue is with season-long fantasy props like this is if he misses one game, is he now right on that number?
No, because 1,200 yards over 16 games would be 75 yards a game to do the quick math. I mean, that's still conceivable. I think we'd have to start talking about 2-3 games before I got concerned. What was his number again? Because we're talking 1,200 yards. That's 1,200. That's to easily surpass what the over/under was. The exact over/under. We go back to it.
1,100.5 on PrizePicks.
So 1,100 for 15 games is just over 70 yards a game. It's like 72, 73, and that's now that's missing 2 games. So I feel pretty comfortable, but I think you'd have to, if you like the under on Zeke, again, I talked about at the beginning of this, I'm going to take a lot of unders when they're aggressive lines. I don't feel like this one's that aggressive for Zeke. It's just multiple factors. Zeke would have to miss 2 or 3 games, and Zeke would have to be not what he was last year. And we talked about it on that show you referenced, and I brought up the fact that he was banged up for a lot of the second half of the year. And even with poor quarterback play, the 2 weeks where he was quote unquote 100% healthy, because I say quote unquote, because he just wasn't on the injury report, he ran for over 100 yards. I'm just asking him to get 70 a game over 15 games to hit this number. A little bit under it, but you get what I'm saying.
So those are the PrizePicks over-under for the skill position players and the projections for the Dallas Cowboys. Once again, prizepicks.com, code MMN, or just use the link down in the description to get a $100 match on your first deposit. The main thing that I wanted to talk to you about too, and this was really in reference to Tony Pollard, is handcuff rankings. When we talk about handcuffs in season-long fantasy football, some people are totally for them, some people are totally against them. I myself am for rostering handcuffs on your team, but I'm never in favor of rostering my own handcuffs because I don't think that's the way that you should play it. You should be trying to maximize the upside of your team. So if I draft Ezekiel Elliott, you will not catch me drafting Tony Pollard. I'll draft Latavius Murray or Alexander Madison or someone else to try to capitalize on someone else having injury problems and then me having substantial upside, which will only make my team better. I'm shooting to have the best overall team, not a push or slightly worse team if something happens to one of my guys. Something happens to one of my first round picks, chances are I'm not going to win. So I'd like to be able to maximize the best possible season for myself. That's why I think that having other people's handcuffs is the way to go. But if we were to rank the handcuffs this season, like who are the guys that we know playing behind the mainstay bell cow running back that are for sure going to have this gig when it comes down to it? Like, can you count them on one hand, or do we have a larger sample? Because there are some guys in split backfields who would just inherit the entire role. Someone like, I don't know how the Arizona backfield would shake out if Chase Edmonds went down, but I would have to think that James Conner's going to get a pretty hefty share of that backfield anyway. But if Edmonds didn't exist, I'd have to think you'd see an uptick for James Conner.
Well, I would actually flip those. I would say Edmonds to Conner, but that's a completely different conversation for a different day. So I would say one of the Arizona guys, Tony Pollard. I'm trying to think, go through teams here to say this. I would say Jamal Williams if Swift gets hurt, because Jamal Williams is already such a factor to begin with. I want to say Alexander Madison, but we just saw what happened with that last year, and he kind of fell on his face. A lot of people were disappointed with him. We know Latavius Murray. We know if Ronald Jones or Leonard Fournette were to get hurt, there's ceiling for them, even with Gio in that mix. I think Chuba Hubbard is the assumption, and I'm on that assumption that if something happens to Christian McCaffrey, you look at that backfield, and it's just Hubbard, especially on his talent. We could say Josh Jacobs and Kenyon Drake. If one of those gets hurt, Kenyon Drake, obviously the backup. Kareem Hunt, but again, Kareem Hunt's being drafted significantly higher than what you would consider a handcuff, but I'm just throwing out all these situations. ETN and James Robinson. Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon. So I think you could get up to probably you need a second hand. Darrell Williams behind Edwards-Helaire, and
maybe Damian
that
Williams.
might be it.
Maybe Damian Williams behind David Montgomery, depending on the health of Tariq Cohen.
Yeah, I could see that one as well.
So I don't want to rehash much of what we talked about on the running back show. You can go tune into that up on Mayo Media Network or on the Pat Mayo
AJ Dillon.
And that was the one I wanted to hit on. But Trey Sermon would be like sort of the obvious one. But like we spoke about, that even if Mostert goes down, because that's going to be a split backfield anyway, it's not like he just grabs the reins and he's the guy. It's still a split backfield with guys that they're going to sign off like the practice squad all of a sudden.
It's just less split. Oh, your boy, Gus Bus. We forgot about Gus Bus. Yeah, there you go. But yeah, Sermon would be the lead, and he would be more if something happened to Mostert. Or hell, Mostert would probably see an increase in his touches if something happened to Sermon, because Sermon's going to be involved. But to speak on the Sermon situation, let's say week 1, everybody's healthy right now. Wayne Gallman, Trey Sermon, Raheem Mostert, Elijah Mitchell, if he's even active because of how many running backs they have, and Juszczyk as that fullback / option. What would you say for Sermon? 35% of the touches. So Mostert goes down. He would jump to probably 50-55, which is what Mostert would be at. He's not going to jump to 70. He's not going to be in that range of, there's only about 10 running backs that usually get in that conversation anyway, and there's usually only 1 or 2 that even get over the 80% threshold. So yes, I think bringing up Sermon for that fact is why we talked about it on that show, is that Sermon in his own right is a little bit overdrafted right now.
If, let's say, Najee Harris gets hurt week 1, is there any Pittsburgh running back you would feel comfortable with?
No. Benny Snell is replacement level, in my opinion. McFarland brings a little bit more burst, but McFarland's not a bell cow running back. I think it'd be split between the two of them. I would thought Jalen Samuels was going to be gone, but he's still hanging around. He might not be if everybody's healthy, but yeah, I think there's backfields like that. Like, go back to, we talked about on that show as well, as the Saquon Barkley with Devontae Booker. Yeah, okay, sure, Devontae Booker looks to be the guy, but we've seen Devontae Booker before. I still think you'd see other options involved. The kid that they drafted out of Arizona, whose name just escaped my mind as I was about to say it again. The brain farts today. I'm having a couple brain farts. But I just think there's certain backfields where even Chuba Hubbard is not on McCaffrey's level. You're not expecting a top 10 running back, but similar to Mike Davis, the volume helps the appeal there. If you put Chuba Hubbard behind Saquon Barkley with the other options that the Giants have, he doesn't step into that same volume role. So some backfields, like the Steelers, you don't, I'm not saying you don't care, but you kind of don't care.
You're thinking of Gary Brightwell on your New York Giants.
Thank you.
I do think it would actually be Booker. He would get sort of the Wayne Gallman shot at it first. Like, if Mostert and Barkley went down week 1 and you had to give me a preference of, like, who do you want for the rest of the year? Do you want Sermon or do you want Booker? I'd probably gamble on Booker, that maybe he can just hold this job. And then he turns into Mike Davis from last year, someone who is not great, but very useful for your fantasy team.
Nah, I would take Sermon on talent and offense. And part of the offense being because Kyle Shanahan, the Midas touch of running back whisperers or whatever you want to throw on top of him, is any positive thing you can spin for Shanahan. I would take that. I would take situation, offensive line, offense, coach. I would take all those things. And talent. I still think Sermon's a better running back than Devontae Booker is.
Oh, talent-wise, I completely agree with you. I'm just thinking about where does the most volume come in? And then you can say, oh, well, Sermon just might be more efficient, but at the same time, he could get usurped at the goal line by a returning Jeff Wilson once he's healthy. If Trey Lance is playing, he could rush in touchdowns. Daniel Jones, you can make that kind of case for, too, that maybe he calls his own number, but Gallman was pretty good, fantasy-wise at least, like every other week. Like, he's not someone you relied on, but he's someone that you could play.
It actually was better than every other week. It was a very low ceiling, and that's why I'm going for Sermon over Booker. It's just, again, it's playing on the Giants offense, and, it's just Booker versus Sermon. I see your conversation and what you're having here. And I'm not saying it's definitively, if it both happened in week 1, that I probably wouldn't take a bet against you just because I see scenarios where both could go either way. I would just go for the higher ceiling.
So if I'm talking handcuffs and handcuffs only, and I'm not going to throw Sermon into that mix. I think Sermon has a chance to win this job and become the lead back and just play better throughout the course of the first 5 weeks of the season. And then all of a sudden he just flips roles with Raheem Mostert. I think that's a completely that's in the range of outcomes and one that's not a super low percentage. That could most definitely happen. So he's not quite on like a handcuff tier for me. If you draft Trey Sermon, you're drafting him that he's going to be really good and the talent is just going to win out on that team. When I talk about handcuffs, in my rankings, top 5 at least of who we consider like quote unquote handcuffs, Latavius Murray, Gus Edwards, Kenyon Drake, A.J. Dillon, and Tony Pollard. Those would be my top 5 guys who, if something happened to the other guy, I can see them playing over 70% of the snaps.
I know. Do you want to only do 5?
No, we can do more, but I think those are the top 5.
The A.J. Dillon one, because of the passing game, I don't like the team, but if something happened to DeAndre Swift, Jamal Williams is going to touch the ball 20 times a game, and he's involved in the passing game more than A.J. Dillon would be. That's the only one I'm just kind of, because I think Kylan Hill might step up if something were to happen to Aaron Jones, just because A.J. Dillon's kind of a lesser version of Derrick Henry, and he's very similar in style and deficiencies, which are in the passing game.
I just don't trust Detroit at all, and
that's fair.
And the decisions that they're going to make. So something like we're worried about Swift because we think that Jamal Williams is going to play a factor regardless of who's healthy and who's not.
Anthony Lynn.
But yeah, and you got Anthony Lynn. So if we just start using like Jamar Jefferson out of nowhere for no reason, like, oh, super, this happened now. I would feel confident with those 5 guys that I mentioned.
Fair.
With those 5 guys that I mentioned, that I feel confident that they're the guys. And those are the sort of guys that I want to target as handcuffs. I don't want to stash a guy on my bench who might not even be the starter if the starter goes down.
Well, then I'm still going to kick him out because did you say James Robinson?
I didn't say James Robinson. I would have James Robinson slightly back on that.
Back as in the top 5 or behind?
Behind Tony Pollard.
Oh, no, I would have James Robinson. He'd be top 2 for me. If something happens to ETN, James Robinson is James Robinson in 2020, which is amazing.
Okay. I mean, I can buy that case. I had him more on a tier with Melvin Gordon and Alexander Madison and Jamal Williams.
No, because I would definitively put him with like Latavius Murray. We actually had that conversation on the show, but I think he's Latavius Murray with more standalone value. And the fact that you don't want to use Murray with Kamara healthy, but the upside is enormous if something happens to Kamara. I think you can use James Robinson, and then if something happens to ETN, James Robinson just kicks right back to 2020 volume. It's David Montgomery argument. Like, who else are the Jaguars really going to turn to? And I know Urban Meyer, we don't know what he's going to do, but let's be real about what his options are in that backfield. And James Robinson is definitively worlds better than anything else that's out there except for ETN.
So I'm just trying to think of some of the other teams. Are we confident that Xavier Jones is the backup to Darrell Henderson before they bring someone else in?
I'd say what's the confidence level? I'll give you a number on that because the confident I would say no, but I would say if you gave me odds, I'd say 6 out of 10, which isn't super confident that he's even the. I don't know that it's not Calais. People were all over Calais 2 months ago, and then even a few weeks ago they're like, oh, Calais could be a thing. Even be like Darrell Henderson. If Darrell Henderson couldn't be healthy, then Calais could be a thing. And then the report from The Athletic, it mentioned Xavier Jones, and Xavier Jones is a talented running back, but there's no guarantee he's the next man up. We've been trying to play this guessing game. This is similar to the Steelers. Like, there's no guarantee. There was people who thought McFarland was significantly better. I thought he is better than Benny Snell, but thought the gap was pretty large, and we saw how that worked out last year. So I just think this is kind of, we're trying to find who the option is, but I don't think there's any guarantee behind Darrell Henderson.
And I think I think that's what the handcuff strategy really boils down to is, like, are you confident that this guy is the new starting running back on this team if someone else goes down? If you're not confident in that, do not draft that player.
No. And, I know we're not bringing them up because you don't really want any of them, as you mentioned before, but another situation that's not guaranteed. Like, if something happened to Zach Moss, Matt Breed is there now. And he's healthy right now. Like, there's no guarantee, and I only bring this up for your point that you're making right now. There's no guarantee that Singletary is the guy, and Singletary's not even really built for that.
No, and like I look at Cincinnati, like if Joe Mixon goes down, who we do figure to be a bell cow, is it Samaje Perine? Yeah, is it Captain America, Chris Evans? I have no idea.
I think it would be a little bit more Chris Evans, but I don't know for sure, not 100%.
So I think this is where paying attention, and we'll continue to cover this stuff on this show as the course of August runs itself out, that the actual beat reports, the injury reports can dictate a lot when it comes to this front about how you should approach. And you might say handcuffs are stupid. I'd rather take a receiver who could bust out, or a backup quarterback, or a backup tight end that I'm high on, and I'm not going to argue against that. I've just found that this strategy, when I've won leagues, this is normally the strategy that breaks my way, and then all of a sudden I am just cruising past everyone else.
Yeah. And we are on the same page a lot of that time. As I always talk about building running back depth, and my pushback for the handcuff thing is, best case scenario, you still end up with one running back. You get somebody else's running back up, and their guy gets hurt. Now you have two. Again, I understand why you want to get your own, because you don't want to end up with a zero. That's the downside. If you don't get your own, you end up with a zero. But you're playing to win. As you always say, Pat, you're playing for first place. I'm not playing to finish fourth. I'm playing to potentially get two, not a net one.
Yeah, you're playing a zero-sum game with yourself. In fact, it might even be a negative, because if, let's say Chuba Hubbard is the guy, and just let's pretend like we know that behind Christian McCaffrey, it'll be a lot like the Mike Davis situation from last year. Like, oh, I lost McCaffrey, and now I have to start Mike Davis. That's not the same thing. You're not really coming out ahead in that situation. In fact, your team is
still
now
negative EV.
Yeah, you're still in the negatives. Not as negative if you just had Christian McCaffrey gone and you lost and had no one to replace him with, but the way that I would look at it is that it's not a zero-sum game if you have someone else's running back, because then you leave them in that position where they lose McCaffrey, you have Chuba Hubbard, and all of a sudden they have no one to replace him with, and you just have an extra asset. You can if you're weak at receiver, you can use that as a trade asset. If you're down at running back already, now you have an upgrade at that spot. Now your team has not only gotten better, someone else's team has gotten significantly worse at the same time. And that's just a huge advantage in fantasy football.
Yep, and that's the key right there. That's what you're trying to do. You're basically coming out with two advantages versus maybe not even an advantage at all.
That will do it on fantasy football picks and bets on Mayo Media Network. Sign up right now at prizepicks.com, code MMN, and find some of those over-under fantasy props of your liking as we go through the season. Of course, they're going to have them in season for every single game and all of the players that you want. And the best way to do that is to match their season-long over-under fantasy props with the Run the Sims inputs that you put in when you become a member at runthesims.com/Mayo for a discount, or help out Jake, runthesims.com/ranks at checkout, and then all of a sudden you get a discount off. And if you do it before August 1st, you get that lifetime membership at that rate. So I highly encourage you to go to runthesims.com right now, check out everything. It's free till August 1st, but you want to get that membership in before then to lock in that rate. Remember to smash the like button for the episode, enter the giveaway, and subscribe to Mayo Media Network. Thank you all for watching. If you missed Monday's show with Cuss and the Jets projections, if you want to laugh, you might want to go check that out. I'll see you next time.